October 30th, 1942, Eastern Mediterranean. The German crew of U-559 floods their own submarine and jumps overboard, sealing the compartments behind them. They know what's inside: weather codes, signal pads, the daily keys to Enigma itself. They also know the rules: let the boat sink, let everything inside die with it. The British can't have it. Above them, HMS Petard circles in the dark. 3 men climb onto the sinking hull. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson gives orders. Able seaman Colin Grazier steadies himself on wet steel, and Tommy Brown, 19 years old, canteen worker, borrowed navy khaki, grips the hatch with shaking hands. His breath fogs in the cold. He knows he doesn't belong here. What the Germans didn't know, those 3 men were about to pull Germany's secrets from a flooded tomb, and within 2 years, the machine Berlin trusted with everything would be speaking in plain English. Tommy usually works in the canteen and delivers messages. Tonight, his hands grip cold steel as he climbs into a U-boat that's already sinking, groaning like something alive and dying. Water rises up the metal steps. Somewhere below, the engine room hisses. Fasson goes down first into the dark. Grazier right behind him. Brown stays at the hatch with his legs planted, ready to grab whatever they throw up. Down in that flooded darkness, Fasson and Grazier feel their way along, touching the walls, opening lockers. They know exactly what they're after: books, notebooks, papers, anything with code tables on them. The boat pitches hard. Someone shouts, "Pass it up!" A waterlogged book smacks into Brown's hands, bloated with seawater. He shoves it under his jacket and hands it up to the conning tower, where someone else grabs it. More bundles come up, one after another, each one grabbed, each one pushed toward the surface. Then something shifts, the sea changes. A long shudder runs through the submarine's hull. Brown feels it and leans into the hatch. Voice raw, "Sir, she's going!" Fasson and Grazier push up their last finds, but the deck tilts. Suddenly everything becomes water. Brown gets one final bundle up into the night, but then the sinking air pulls him under. He kicks, fights, breaks the surface, gasping, just as the U-559 folds into the deep. Both sailors are still inside. The petard pulls Brown and the wet books aboard. The pages reek of salt and diesel. A petty officer wraps them in dry cloth. Brown coughs up seawater and stares at the black spot where the submarine was. One thought won't leave him: we got them. This is how a book sinks warships. While Germany trusted a machine with 4 spinning rotors and codes that felt impossible to crack, a teenager just pulled their weather codes and signal pads from a sinking hull. The people who could use them were hundreds of miles away, in a place full of bicycles and pencils, the kind of place where you'd never guess a war was being won. Early 1940, Buckinghamshire. Frost on the bicycles, a country house that's basically turned into a puzzle factory. In one chilly spare room, it smells like damp wool and boiled tea. There's a 20-year-old guy named John Herivel. He's sitting at a blank page, thin and bright-eyed, rubbing his hands together to stay warm. He's been brought to Bletchley Park as a junior mathematician, which mostly means he copies things, sorts things, listens to people talk, and tries not to look useless while the brilliant people around him argue about stuff he barely understands. But one idea keeps nagging at him. The machine isn't the only machine here. The people are machines too, in a way. They have habits. They get tired. And that's going to matter. So here's the thing about the German Enigma machine. It's basically a typewriter with a serious attitude problem. You press a letter, and a completely different letter lights up somewhere else. Press it again, and it changes to something else. Inside, rotors spin and swap wires around. And every single day, German operators have to set those rotors to new positions using a key sheet. Picture this: a German operator in some freezing hut up in northern Europe on a grey morning, running late for his shift. His glove tips are cut off so he can actually feel the keys. He's got to set up the machine and send the first weather reports of the day, short, routine stuff, but it matters because everything else depends on it. And here's what Herivel realizes: people like routines. When nobody's watching, they cut corners. He draws a square on his paper. He's imagining this tired German operator turning those rotor wheels the way his hands just naturally do it after he's done it 100 times. Your body falls into a pattern, right? Herivel sketches what he calls lazy starting positions, places that are close to where they were yesterday, easy to reach from the default spot. Then it clicks. All these shortcuts would show up in the first messages of the day in predictable ways. If those first messages are always weather reports, which they basically always are, if you can guess how a tired guy turns a wheel, you can take a search that looks completely impossible and shrink it down to something humans can actually handle, something you could work through. So this young guy walks into Hut 6 with this idea. He's trying to keep his voice steady. Look, he says, if operators tend to set the machine close to where it was yesterday, and if the first messages are basically the same weather report every time, maybe we could catch them being lazy. He's standing there in front of senior cryptographers. One looks over his glasses, another frowns. Someone makes a polite noise that's basically just dismissing him. But Herivel keeps going. He draws the square on a chalkboard, marks the possible starting points, shows where the morning's radio intercepts might line up. He later said, "They humoured me and then it worked." The first time the Herivel square actually cracks something, nobody cheers. They just move faster. A clerk hunches over a teleprinter calling out numbers. Another clerk writes them down. A section leader circles numbers with a pencil. You can actually hear it scratch. There's a murmur that runs through the whole hut. It's low and warm and electric. The day's Luftwaffe key is opening up, letter by letter. Messages that would have been complete nonsense for weeks suddenly make sense. Someone pours tea. Someone else whispers, "Good lad." Herivel walks outside into the pale sunlight, feeling taller than he ever has. This is how it starts, not with some brand new engine or massive machine, but with a hunch about a tired guy's fingers and the patterns they make. The result is simple and visual. A chalk square, a handful of likely starting positions, and the morning's weather traffic just giving up without a fight. There's a guy named Dilly Knox who tells new recruits, "Have you got a pencil? Here, have a go." Half joking, half serious challenge. His words matter. Turns out, a pencil is a weapon. Every minute you save breaking the daily key changes everything. If you crack it at 8 in the morning instead of 2 in the afternoon, you can move a convoy away from the German U-boats before nightfall. You can put fighters right in the middle of a bomber group if you read their orders before they even taxi down the runway. A method like this takes what looks like an impossible universe of options and shrinks it down to something you could walk through in an hour. That changes everything. At the start, Hut 6 has dozens of people. By the end of the war, Bletchley Park will have around 10,000 people working there, about 3/4 of them women. The bombs, these electromechanical machines, will go from 1 to hundreds by war's end, but you can't see any of that yet in 1940. What you see is chalk dust on someone's sleeve and a junior who tried something cheeky and actually got away with it. Someone says in the lunch line, "Machines are only as strong as the people who run them." It's not an official motto. It's just something people say when they're trying really hard not to sound proud. Churchill will later call them the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled, and that line will stick. But in 1940, the geese don't know they're geese. They just bike in the cold every morning and show up. Here's how Enigma security actually works. The Germans change the rotor settings every day, they've got a plug board wired in a certain way, and the operator picks a message key. But if that message key is chosen carelessly, maybe similar to yesterday's, or following some simple pattern, the first messages leak just enough structure to crack it open. The Herivel tip does exactly that. You use human habits to trim the search from impossible down to possible. With that smaller space, clerks with simple tools can test the likely positions fast, way before the heavy machines even get involved. The joy of that first win lasts about a day. Then the next day comes and asks the same question with a completely different answer. It's relentless. It never stops. What comes next, proof that pencil scratches can actually change the outcome at sea, doesn't happen in a hut. It happens at night, on the water, under searchlights, when a quiet young woman's decrypt sends the Royal Navy out hunting under the moon. There's a woman named Mavis Batey who remembers it like this. "I wrote it down and took it next door. We shared 2 bottles of wine after, That story starts with a phone call and ends with cruisers exploding, and that's where we're heading next. March 27th, 1941. Somewhere in the Mediterranean. Warm breeze. Crescent moon hanging over the water. Meanwhile, back in Buckinghamshire, a county in England, a 19-year-old girl named Mavis Lever sits at her desk with a pencil in hand. And then, suddenly, a pattern clicks into place. Mavis works in a small room that smells like paper and telegraph ink. She's good with languages, good at spotting patterns other people miss. Her boss is a classical scholar named Dilwyn Knox. Everyone calls him Dilly. When he first hired her, he said something like, "Hello, we're breaking machines. Have you got a pencil? Have a go." And she did. Tonight, that pencil is about to change everything. The Italian fleet is on the move. Radio signals are carrying their orders across the airwaves. Yesterday, the code resisted. Today, it breaks. Mavis writes down what she's found, checks it, triple checks it, then takes the paper to the next room. A phone call races across the country like electricity. In Alexandria, Admiral Andrew Cunningham gets exactly what he needs, the information to set a trap for the Italian ships between Crete and Greece. Orders start flying. Radios crackling. Men moving. All night, the Mediterranean turns into a war zone. Searchlights cut through the darkness. Officers are calling out distances and angles to their gun crews. The Italian heavy cruiser Times, Polar Times, gets hit by a torpedo and starts sinking. Her sister ships, the Times Zara Times and the Times Fiume Asterisk, try to help, but they have no idea that British battleships are already there, waiting. When the big guns finally open fire at point-blank range, it's white-hot devastation. Boom! That massive, echoing sound then screams steam, metal tearing open, ships being ripped apart. Mavis doesn't see any of it. She only hears about it later, and even then only parts of it, because everything's classified. When she finally learns what happened, she says, "We shared 2 bottles of wine. A teenager's pencil work, her notes, they just sent an entire fleet straight into a slaughter." A direct line from her hand to the gunnery officer's firing console at midnight on the Mediterranean. Historians call this the Battle of Cape Matapan, and it's a huge British victory. Multiple Italian heavy cruisers destroyed, thousands of sailors dead or struggling in the water by morning. The Italians thought they were executing a coordinated mission. By dawn, they're in the sea, and the British Navy owns the night. The difference? The British knew what was coming. Decoded messages told Cunningham exactly where to position his ships. Here's how it works. Naval radio signals tell you everything. Departure times, where ships are meeting up, what forces are being sent where. If you can read those signals fast enough, you can figure out where a fleet has to be at a specific time. You don't need to decode every single message. The pattern is what matters. Once you see it, you move your own ships there first. In the dark, surprise becomes a weapon. Knowing they'll be at point X between time Y and Z, that's all you need. The Italian Navy isn't careless. The captains are skilled and brave. Their messages are encrypted with Enigma machines. But that encryption, combined with standard procedures, basically draws the outline of their own defeat. An invisible paragraph turned into a visible explosion. Back at Bletchley, it's quiet again. Mavis sets down her pencil and rubs her eyes. She'll work on German codes later and do brilliant work, but tonight she's earned a drink. Somewhere in a logbook in a hut that doesn't officially exist, someone writes, "Decrypted traffic enabled interception. WRENS successful." The next morning, like nothing happened, a section head walks through. "All right, what's today's key?" That's how it works here. You get your win and then immediately you move on to the next problem. But just as people are starting to feel confident, a rumour becomes fact. The Germans just added a 4th rotor to their Enigma machines. Everything they've cracked until now is worthless. On February 1st, 1942, a German petty officer working in signals does what feels like the safest thing. He adds an extra wheel to an Enigma machine. More moving parts, he figures, means better security. The Kriegsmarine has just fitted its U-boats with a 4th rotor, and the British codebreakers will come to call this new encrypted signal Shark. The effect back in Buckinghamshire is instant and crushing. The silence isn't on the radio. Messages keep flooding in, just like always. But on paper, nothing. Complete gibberish. The key that used to unlock everything is now completely out of reach. Out in the North Atlantic, convoys move through grey waters under grey skies, while German wolf packs coordinate their attacks with absolute confidence. The escort ships fill the airwaves with orders. Hold your course, report your bearing, stand by for signal. But there's no signal coming, not the one the code breakers would have sent if they could. One escort officer opens his logbook and writes it plain, "We are back to fighting blind." At Bletchley Park, life goes on as usual. 3 shifts, around the clock. Jean Valentine and the other WRNS operators keep the bombe huts humming, that endless mechanical clatter, the smell of hot oil and ozone. But here's the problem. These machines were built for a 3-rotor world. Add another rotor and they hit a wall. They stall. The nights get long. Someone says, over tea, exhausted, "We keep waiting for a signal that never comes. Nothing breaks through." When the code breakers are doing their job, convoys can slip around wolf packs before the attack. Without those intercepts, ships just disappear. Merchant vessels go down. Crews freeze in the North Atlantic in minutes. Back in Liverpool, families wait for letters that'll never arrive. The longer this blackout lasts, the more aggressive the U-boats become. These aren't amateurs, they're elite crews trained by careful handlers and directed by a signal system that trusts its machines completely. So why does one extra rotor change everything? Imagine the rotors like scrambler wheels. 3 rotors already gives you numbers so huge they barely make sense. Add a 4th, and the possibilities multiply beyond belief. The bombe machines test possible positions one by one, but they were designed for 3 rotors only. Add that 4th wheel, and suddenly the search becomes impossible. You'd have to rebuild the machines from scratch and rethink the whole logical approach. Without captured codebooks or really strong intelligence guesses, there's no way to crack it. Not until something gives. Bletchley doesn't shrink though. It grows. New workers arrive month after month. Within a year, the place is packed like a small town, and about 3 out of 4 workers are women. But hiring more people doesn't solve the problem if you don't have something to work with. Every tea break, every walk through the rain to the huts, the question hangs over everyone. Where does the next breakthrough come from? It comes from the sea. It comes from men in a small boat with grappling hooks and a kid waiting below with quick hands. Officers make the call. Fasson and Grazier decide to actually go down into that sinking ship. A teenager who still needs permission to buy a drink stays at the hatch passing up documents while the water rises. That's what being cut off does to people. It pushes them to do extraordinary things. On the German side, confidence stays high. Their procedures are tight, their operators are trained. Someone might joke in a signals office, 4 rotors now, let them try. It's not arrogance exactly. It's just faith in the machine. But convoys need a way forward that doesn't end in slaughter, and the people at Bletchley need something, anything, to turn all their grinding work back into real power. So they go hunting for a book. November 24th, 1942. A courier walks into a building at Bletchley Park and signs for a package. Some books wrapped in cloth, still damp and reeking of salt and diesel. When they unwrap it, the whole room suddenly smells like the Mediterranean. You can practically taste the ocean air in the middle of Buckinghamshire, England. These aren't the main codebooks. That would have been too easy. But they're the next best thing. They're the weather and short signal codes. See, the Germans compressed common messages into neat little patterns. Weather reports, contact updates, status checks, all of it got boiled down to specific codes. Once you know what patterns to expect, predictability becomes your weapon. The staff spreads these pages out by the heaters, carefully drying them and cataloguing everything. It's quiet, focused work. What they're really doing is turning a dead U-boat into an attack strategy. Which radio networks use which codes? When do these messages typically go out? Which signal patterns can be traced back to specific locations? Every answer gets added to the menu for the bombe machines. Every clue opens up another pathway through that impossibly complex 4-rotor world. One naval officer puts it perfectly. Asterisk. We have something to bite on. Asterisk. And bite they do. Convoy routes start shifting slightly north. Escorts pick up speed around dusk with new rendezvous points. Day after day, week after week, messages that used to take weeks to decode now take just days. A year later, with faster machines and the Americans joining in, they're reading intercepts sometimes the very same day they're captured, sometimes faster. Here's how it works. Those captured codebooks gave them cribs, chunks of plain text they could match against the encrypted message. The bombe machine hunts for logical contradictions to rule out wrong settings. One good crib is like finding where a zipper starts, pull it in the right direction, and the whole thing comes open fast. Now the team knows exactly what kind of messages are flying through the airwaves and how they're built. They stop guessing and start targeting. Combine that with one lazy operator who always sends the same message the same way, and suddenly you're not just cracking one message, you're cracking an entire day's worth of traffic. Someone posts a little note at their desk. Asterisk. Latency. 1 day. Asterisk. It's not always accurate yet, it's more of a goal, but it changes everything about how everyone works. Now, convoy routing feels smart instead of desperate. One signals officer will remember it this way later. Asterisk. We sent them away from where the submarines were hunting, and sometimes we sent our own hunters to meet them instead. Asterisk. Once you know where the U-boats are planning to set up their patrol lines, you can set up an ambush of your own. Enemies who think they're invisible never see the depth charges coming. The place explodes with people, thousands of them, and about 3/4 are women. The bombe huts get absurdly hot and loud, filled with the constant clatter of relays and machinery spinning. At night, you can see the light bleeding through the windows and hear what almost sounds like music, the rhythm of thousands of electrical switches firing in perfect sequence. Valentine's barely 4'10". She stands on a step stool just to reach the top of the machine. She jokes about her height, but there's nothing small about what she and her team are actually doing. They run one menu after another until a machine stops, then they verify the settings and phone in the results. They know that every second matters, that a delay somewhere can cost lives somewhere else. The mood shifts. It's not about scoring points against the enemy anymore. It's the feeling you get when the ocean gives people back, when an enemy's confidence in their routine runs straight into a teenager's courage and a room full of brilliant, exhausted people. The Germans didn't become careless. The war made them predictable. Those daily weather reports they always send, the very thing that kept their system safe, became the handle that turned the lock. Paper beats steel, not in theory, in an actual room that reeked of salt water and ink, right after a boy got pulled from the sea. The officers start speaking with more confidence. The WRENS operators, the women in the naval service, smile a different way after a successful decrypt, even though half of them haven't slept in 2 days. New notices go up. Another bombing machine just came online. Now that they've got the door open, speed is going to take it from here. The momentum keeps building. 3 in the morning. The hum and heat of the machines. An operator's hand hovers over the stop button. A light flashes. Then suddenly there's a map of the North Atlantic, May 1943. Red pins turn into little crosses marking kills. It's 3 in the morning in Hut 11A, and the bombing room is all noise and heat. Drums spinning, cables everywhere, dials that look like they came off a submarine. Valentine stands on a footstool. Maintenance. Got tired of watching her hop around. She's small, quick, precise, hair pinned up, sleeves rolled. 10 women on this shift, 1 petty officer, and a cryptanalyst waiting next door for either nothing or everything. Someone says the menu is good. That means the logic they're testing is solid. Jean flips a switch. The drums blur. One sound cuts through everything else. That's all you hear. The bombe chews through candidate settings one by one. Then a lamp stops it all. Jean calls out, "Stop." 2 operators rush over. She reads off the numbers, steady voice. They check it twice. Then the note goes through the hatch to the cryptanalyst. He runs his own tests. Everyone waits. 30 seconds, 90 seconds. Then, we've got it. No celebration. Someone writes it down. The next steps happen exactly like they always do. Someone picks up the phone. A voice comes through from miles away. Naval section. The line is secure the way 1940s lines are, which is to say, barely. "Read back," he says. Jean does. The officer draws a line on his chart and kinks it north. Come morning, the ocean looks the same as always. But out in the dark somewhere, A German wolf pack is waiting at coordinates that are about to be empty. The convoy they're hunting? Just a smudge of smoke on the horizon now, smoke that keeps its distance. 5 machines, 10 women, 1 petty officer, all night long. By the end of the war, hundreds of machines doing exactly this. A flip of a switch, a bulb lights up, a voice saying, "We've got it." Then hours later, a man on a destroyer bridge looks at his radar and sees a lot less to worry about. When a bombe stops, it means those rotor positions work. They're consistent with the logic, but they need more testing. That check is fast. When you know what you're doing, feed the candidate back through, sometimes with a new menu. If it holds, the daily key comes together. Once you have that key, every message in the network for that day, sent or waiting, opens up. Save a minute at 3 in the morning, and you save lives at 3 in the afternoon at sea. A German petty officer on some other night slots in his extra rota. He sends out a short contact report, quick and tight, sure that brevity means nobody can break it. He never sees the lamp that stopped in Buckinghamshire. He never hears the order coming hours later that tells a convoy to slip sideways off his patrol line. He just stares at the water and wonders why the hunters never quite find anything anymore. May 1943. Red pins turn to crosses on a chart. A teenager's notebook. A junior's chalk mark. A WRENS stoplight. Every single cross has all 3 in it. U-boats sink so fast the man who sent them out has to call them home. May 1943 sounds different before you ever look at the statistics. There's less chatter on the radio when convoys stop reporting torpedo sightings. Escort captains get a few more hours of sleep between sonar pings. In shore offices, clerks are running out of hands. They're replacing red pins that mark U-boat positions with black crosses, so fast they need help. Somewhere between 40 and 43 U-boats went down that month, depending on who's counting. However you do the math, it's the same story. Catastrophic for a force that used to own the Atlantic. The curves cross that month. Merchant ships stop getting sunk as often. U-boats start dying faster. The numbers that really matter aren't precise. They're about what they mean. You can't train submarine crews as quickly as factories can build replacement parts. You can't compete with code breakers who are reading your signals almost in real time when all you have is guesswork and courage. On May 24th, Admiral Dönitz reads the numbers and orders his submarines to pull back. He doesn't say the word defeat, commanders don't, but that order is an admission louder than any speech. The Germans had started this with confidence. They added another rotor to their cipher machine, followed procedure perfectly, and figured they'd be invisible. By May, their best boats were dying faster than any system could save them. They weren't invisible, they just believed they were. And belief isn't the same as fact. Their own competence made them predictable, and once you're predictable, someone with a lamp and a machine in a hut can read you. Red pins turn to crosses on the map. Here's why breaking their code mattered so much. Wolfpack tactics depend on timing. Multiple submarines need to converge on a convoy from different angles, all coordinated, all hitting at once. That only works if you can keep your signals secret. But if the other side is reading your orders within a day, they can nudge a convoy just a few degrees and slide it between your patrol lines. You can't adjust fast enough. Your boats are stuck where doctrine says they should be, and doctrine moves slower than fuel allows. Secrecy that works at a distance falls apart when someone's reading it almost as fast as you're sending it. By the end of the war, the British had hundreds of bomb machines running. Bletchley Park had grown into a small city, around 9,000 or 10,000 people, 3 out of every 4 of them women. Bicycles lined the fences. Convoy routes shifted by a few degrees here and there, and hundreds of sailors lived who would have died. Everything flipped in a single spring month. No single person owns that story. It belongs to ordinary people doing their jobs well. The German submariners fought hard. Their officers ran a tight ship. That matters because it means this wasn't about the enemy being careless, it was about being outmatched by something they didn't see coming. In a signals room somewhere, a petty officer tells a junior to check the procedures again. When the order comes down to stand down, he looks at his hands for a long minute and doesn't say anything. He carries that silence for the rest of his life. Going from unbreakable to broken took 1 month on a calendar, a curve on a graph, and names nobody remembers. It ends with a pencil and a list. When the war ends, everything changes overnight. The huts empty out. Bicycles that used to be everywhere just vanish. Fences start falling apart, bit by bit, until they're barely there anymore. Jean Valentine never mentions the frozen lamps. Mavis Batey keeps quiet about the night the Mediterranean suddenly lit up in a way she'd never seen before. John Herivel becomes a teacher, the kind who tells his best students to just trust their instincts. Tommy Brown goes home with lungs that still remember what seawater tastes like. For decades, none of them can talk about it. They can't explain why the nights felt so long or why the mornings felt so incredibly sharp and clear. Then, in the 70s, the story finally comes out. It starts quietly, through obituaries, small ceremonies, museum labels. Someone walks into a room and sees a rebuilt bombe machine spinning, and you can feel the heat coming off it. The guide explains that women ran these machines, working shifts. The noise? You could actually taste it. We had to stand on a stool just to reach the drums, and people laugh at first, then stop when they really understand what that means. On the wall, there's a plaque with 3 names from a night at sea: Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, able seaman Colin Grazier, and Tommy Brown. 2 of them didn't come back. 1 did. All 3 changed everything. Churchill's quote about geese that laid golden eggs and never made a sound, well, now people are finally allowed to talk. In the museum, the most powerful thing isn't even a speech. It's a pencil in a display case, next to a book warped from salt water. You can still smell the oil and ocean on it. What that pencil represents is this. Ordinary people turned something impossible into Black May, into charts showing the enemy losing and convoys surviving, into silence on the radio that meant people would live. From impossible to finally revealed,